we are joined now by Russell Baxter, the football guru and covers the NFL for FanSided. What's going on, Russell?
Oh, I don't know. NBA Finals?
We did weirdly. We did start off the show at 7 this morning with an NBA hot take. My partner was crying that Curry deserves better at Golden State, so that totally set the tone for the show with ridiculous antics, Russell. So you're gonna.
He deserves better. I don't know because of the way things are going right now. You mean?
Yeah, they completely have wasted the back end of his prime by trying to build this second young core with like Jonathan Kuminga and Moses Moody and James Wiseman and Jordan Poole. And turns out all those guys are terrible, but at one point they had nice trade value that they could have gotten a nice piece for. That's all. That's all I mean. That's all I mean.
Hey, I get it. Maybe they can get Mahomes next offseason.
Hey, there's not much he can't do. But
No.
so, Russell, is this thing's kind of shaping out though? Because and we're guilty of it. I've talked about. Everybody's talked about the franchise and how well run it is, and how the 53rd player makes the same plays as the top two players and their preparation. We've covered the gamut of how good and well run the Chiefs are. What will that say in a game like this where I clearly think I don't know if I'm going to pick the Eagles, but obviously Vegas thinks it's a toss-up. Like, what happens if Philadelphia wins? This is the same team, Russell, where we tried to fire their head coach every week after their first 6 or 7 wins.
Yeah, isn't it interesting? People want to fire a head coach who's 4 for 4 getting into the playoffs.
Yeah.
And is now joined a somewhat short list of making 2 Super Bowl appearances, okay, as a head coach. And now Jalen Hurts, a somewhat short list. There's like 20-plus guys who have been starting quarterbacks for at least 2 Super Bowls. Okay, of course, Mahomes will be 5, okay, which is tied with Elway for second place. And, of course, Tom Brady, I think, has 73. So, yeah, it's funny. But to a degree, I understand because of what happened last year, the meltdown that occurred late in the season, and it was bad, and was mostly on the defensive side of the ball. This was a team that was, by season's end, 31st in the league against the pass. 31st. This year, they're first, by the way. And if you watch them against Tampa Bay in the playoffs last year, it was kind of reminiscent of the Steelers against Baltimore in the playoffs this year. Lifeless, just helpless. And even the last game of the regular season, they lost to the Giants, who were horrible last year. So it's funny how things can turn very quickly in this league. We saw it with Washington this year. It went from a 4-win team to a 14-win team, including the playoffs, and they're in the NFC title game. But yes, we're quick to slap on, fire the coach, greatest of all time, dynasty this, dynasty that, and so on. It's that instant gratification. And then you sit back and you wait and so on. Now, that's not to diminish anything the Chiefs have done. 5 Super Bowl appearances in 6 years is, unheard of. But here's the funny thing about that. So some people want to anoint, if they win 3 straight Super Bowls, which of course has never been done, but it's been done in terms of NFL titles, which would be the Packers from 65 to 67. And then the Packers from 29 to 31. I was not alive then. But that was before there was a postseason. They awarded championships based on winning percentage. Okay? But isn't it interesting to notice, like, think about some of the other major sports, hockey, basketball, baseball. The longest championship streak in the history of the National Football League is 3 in a row. And this league has been around for over 100 years. Don't you find that intriguing?
Yeah.
And that's pre-free agency, and that's during free agency. It just shows you how hard it is to do. But again, I guess the point I really wanted to make is there are people out there who have already declared this the greatest team of all time, and they just bookended a team that was in the playoffs for almost 2 decades and won 6 Super Bowl titles. Okay, so I don't know. Maybe next year Carolina wins the Super Bowl. They reel off a couple in a row, and they'll be the greatest team of all time.
So, Russell, if I just go back to recent history and what has given Mahomes fits, it's what would give any quarterback fits. It's a front four that can get after him, similar to what Tampa Bay
sure.
did. You got to think, man, if there's a recipe or a blueprint out there, it's not handing the ball to big play guy Saquon. That's not a clock killer. It would be Philadelphia's front four, right? Pretty good getting after the QB, and that back end is good. Is that where this thing is going to be won or lost?
Well, I mean, the trenches always decide. And here's what you got to think about Philadelphia. By the way, Philadelphia's in their third Super Bowl in 8 years, okay? But they have a different kind of common denominator. They've done this with 2 head coaches and 2 different starting quarterbacks. Of course, it was Nick Foles, who was filling in for Carson Wentz back in Super Bowl 52, and now Hurts these 2 of the last 3 years. The difference, there's a similarity with the Chiefs, but a big difference. The common denominator for the Eagles guys is the general manager, Howie Roseman. And one of the things he has always stressed, and he's made some great deals. You know, he traded for A.J. Brown. One year he traded for DeAndre Swift. Then he got, Barkley in free agency this year. Always the trenches. And remember Jim Schwartz, the year they won the Super Bowl over New England, Jim Schwartz's defensive line was good and deep. And Brady threw for 505 yards in that Super Bowl, remember?
Yeah.
But there was one instance where that paid off. And late in that game, Brandon Graham around the corner strips Brady. The only turnover by the Patriots all afternoon. Derek Barnett picks up the screw. They get an insurance field goal, and they win 41-33. I wonder if we don't see something like this again, the depth of the defensive line of the Philadelphia Eagles. And by the way, Brandon Graham's still there. And they've changed some pieces. I think what's remarkable about Philadelphia is they're just, off of what happened last season and the retirement of 2 key cogs in the middle of their line, Fletcher Cox and Jason Kelsey. Yeah. And here they are back again.
Russell, so I know that we kind of have tried to bury the Eagles for the last 2 years kind of with Sirianni. Is that just a thing that we overblew? Did they patch things up, or was that never really there in the first place? Because it did seem like there was real tension in that locker room between Sirianni and Hurts and some of the other pieces involved there. Like, what do we make of that? Does that still exist and they've just been good enough to overcome it, or what do you do with that?
I think that, and again, this is totally from the outside, okay? But just some observations and I can only make observations based on what written and heard and seen and so on. And it's funny I use the word heard, okay? Because I know Nick Sirianni was vilified, for lack of a better word, by one particular national talk show hostess just for his opening press conference. Yeah. You remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I mean, are you kidding me? That's your idea of breaking down a head coach? I mean, I know it's not as sophisticated as a quarterback that wears his hat on backwards, but I digress. Nick Sirianni is one of those personalities, okay? And we have seen those kind of personalities in the league. Is it any more blunt than Sean Payton was with Russell Wilson last year? Mm-hmm. Any more blunt than Jerry Glanville used to be? Any more blunt than Jim Harbaugh, Mike Ditka? But you see, now we hear about all these interactions that we didn't hear about 20 years ago. Yeah. Okay, and Sirianni's he's had some of his on the sidelines, whatever, back and forth with Zach Ertz a couple of weeks ago. That seems like it's water under the bridge. So much of what we now try to form our opinions on is like front and center, okay? Be it press conferences, be it, the NFL is so visible, okay? And of course, meanwhile, while all this is going on, we're trying to figure out this massive conspiracy theory as to why the Chiefs keep on getting into the Super Bowl.
But let me ask you something. If you're talking about winning, and God bless the Saints, I hope they get their guy, whomever that may be, as a head coach. But we are looking at all the new young phenoms and Glenn and these weird press conferences with Cohen and Ben Johnson and being comfortable, uncomfortable, and Aaron Glenn saying he just texted Rodgers. Could I make the case that quietly the Raiders had the best offseason hire with Carroll, or you're still in wait and see mode with a guy that's been removed from the game for a little bit?
Well, he wasn't removed that long.
Yeah.
Okay. And let's remember Pete Carroll's NFL career. Okay. Which began 30 years ago. Remember, he was the head coach of the New York
Jets
for one season. And he was the victim of one of the games he was the victim of was Dan Marino's fake spike and the touchdown pass to Mark Ingram. And he was one and done. And what was one of the most memorable things you saw about Pete Carroll on the sidelines? Putting his hands around his throat for the choke symbol when somebody missed a field goal.
Yeah.
Remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. He came back 94. Then he went to the Patriots in 97. Okay. 3 years there. Couple playoff appearances. Went to USC. And then pops back into the NFL. Takes a team to back-to-back Super Bowls. His passion is unquestioned. Okay. He still looks like he's about 35 years old, let's be honest.
Yeah.
Okay. And this is probably, in terms of credibility-wise, their best hire as a head coach in a while.
Completely agree.
Okay. Some people, Josh McDaniels. Okay. Well, we saw what Josh did during his stint elsewhere. And, of course, there was the one stint which he changed his mind on, which had to leave some doubts about his head coaching. At offensive coordinator, he's back with the Patriots. I'm sure he'll be fine there and so on. But, yeah, I think you could make a very strong case for that because he brings a proven track record. Think about this. What is so much different than Pete Carroll returning to the NFL than Sean Payton after a year of retirement, and then Jim Harbaugh, who's back in the NFL for 10 years. Obviously Jim struggled last year with that 11-6 record and a playoff appearance, even though their defense kind of went belly up in the second half of the season. If you can coach, you can coach. And, I think the Raiders have gone, I kid about this all the time. They've gone through more head coaches the last 20-something years than I've gone through potato chips. But let's also put in perspective how bad this franchise has been. Their last playoff win was the AFC Championship game in 2002 against the Titans. Their last Super Bowl was 41 years ago.
That's our guy.
41 years ago. And we talk about the Cowboys not getting back to the NFC Championship game in almost 3 decades. Okay, but we think about the Raiders. Hell, the Dolphins haven't been back to the Super Bowl, haven't won a Super Bowl in 51 years. Some of these blue blood franchises that will always be in the hearts of a lot of fans and media and stuff like that, and understandably so, some of them have hit some long championship droughts. It's been 30 years since the 49ers won a Super Bowl. They've lost their last 3 Super Bowls.
That's our guy, Russell Baxter. Russell, we appreciate it as always. We'll talk again soon.
Thanks, Russ.
You got it.